Excellent. So now we have a little time for questions from the committee. If anybody has any questions to our panel?
Hope they're not from Boston.
No, that's the Stars. No, that's Nashville.
Nashville.
But we lost in Game 7, double overtime. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Claire and I were watching that, actually, to see if you would be here.
Okay, John.
Yeah. So you said something that I think is key, which is Trameal is an interesting agent because, as you know, homeopathic medicines are passaged enough times that there's actually no effective therapeutic level, depending on how you look at molecular interactions. So I don't want to argue that. But what you suggest is that it clearly works at a certain segment of the population. And one of the issues that we're dealing with is that, as you say, the placebo effect, and I'm a neurologist, the brain's ability to control the rest of the body is huge. So you're using a placebo and it's working. I don't see any problem with that, although some people might argue. But I wondered what your thoughts were on that particular issue. And you talked about the touch, the importance of all these things. I mean, I think they're all important.
Let's see, placebo. So I've done a few placebo injections on patients, namely physicians, who I said, listen, I don't know if this corticosteroid is going to work better than saline injection. The data suggests that saline is almost as good as hyaluronic acid for arthritis and such. And so he said, you know what, inject one knee with saline and one with hyaluronic acid. Let me see what happens. And there's no difference in the outcome. And that's even in the studies, all these injection trials we do, saline is, I should back up a second. Saline injection is not a placebo. I mean, it's a treatment, yeah. But there's no question the brain is so darned powerful, we're never going to figure out how this stuff works. But the thought process, I think, is so critical in terms of what happens with the outcome. And, from a neurology standpoint, people who envision getting healthier get healthier. And I don't know why that works. I mean, I know of studies of individuals who just put their arm out and visualize contracting the muscles, but not actually contracting the muscles. So not even contracting the muscle, just visualizing it, not pretending, but actually visualizing the muscles contracting. And they gain about 35% of the strength versus 50% increase in those who actually do the exercise. So that's that placebo affecting what's happened neurologically distally. That's just crazy. But the brain's so powerful that all these things we do, if we put it in a positive manner, I think we're all salesmen in our jobs, no matter what we do. If we can sell it and sell it ethically and honestly, I'm all for the power of placebo. Hope that answered it.
Stephen?
This is back on the CBD cannabinoids. Is there any evidence that those are reaching systemic, in the work you've done, do they reach systemic concentrations?
No, similar to some of the other topical agents, there's no evidence that they really absorb very much systemically at all. In fact, there's quite a few papers on that. I'm guest editing a special edition on cancer pain. It's coming out in June for seminars in oncology nursing, and we have a really good paper in there on cannabis. And they do talk a little bit about topical administration, but just in the review of the papers, no, not a lot of systemic absorption. And so that's why a lot of older patients really prefer those as well.
So do you think it's just following up? Is it a placebo effect, or do you think it's has some kind of gradient from the surface into the tissue? Or
so we know we have an endocannabinoid system, just like our opioid system. We've got peripheral receptors for everything. So I think there is a physiological effect, but I also strongly believe in the placebo effect. The research says a third of us will respond to placebos. Interestingly, though, the placebo effect is sometimes short-term, where I've seen therapeutic effects work longer than that, and I don't know what your thought is on that.
So Texas just passed the law to allow hemp. So we have been seeing a lot of the CBD use, but a lot of my patients have summer homes and winter homes up in Colorado, so they bring this stuff back. And so a lot of them swear by it. I have nothing to discount it, but if it works, and they're not getting, I have 80-year-old women who are using this stuff and saying it's really helped them a lot. Again, it's all anecdotal, but if it helps them, I don't really care. I don't think there's going to be any major adverse effects with that. I would agree with Janine.
So I have a question for Dr. Zemsky in particular. You said you had about a 20-year experience with topical ketamine with sometimes with amitriptyline
Correct, yeah.
in children.
Yes.
So do you see anything related to children that you think this committee should be considering in their report?
Well, I think children shouldn't be left out of any discussions, number one. That's been the problem all along. So I think from that standpoint, I think that's important. You know, when we talk about topical preparations, as Dr. Murthy mentioned earlier, you know, if we're talking about, you know, I get concerned about kids under 2 months, premature infants, et cetera. But after that, the skin barrier is, as far as I know, intact. So I think then it just becomes body surface area safety. I mean, certainly, you know, even for some of the pharmaceutically FDA-approved compounds, EMLA cream, for instance, there's been episodes of methemoglobinemia associated when used inappropriately. And in fact, when used inappropriately in adults as well, there have been deaths associated with some topical anesthetics. So it's all about using the right amount and you know, we use a lot of topical anesthetics in pediatrics. And
So
have done so
you feel the field, it's a.
well, we use probably more topical anesthetics.
Uh-huh.
Certainly, we may use more topical drugs than the adult world. I don't know the comparison, but relatively speaking, we use them every day at our hospital. We actually have a whole effort to try to use more. So, you know, that experience has been around for a long, long time.
John?
So you raise an important point, which the committee has been discussing with others as well. And that is that somehow topically, if it's rubbed on, it's got to be safer, right? And especially in children, you know, there are case reports about smearing, well, EMLA cream on the whole bottom because it's raw and other things getting levels where it's problematic. And I just wondered for amongst all three of you if that's consistent with what you see in your patient populations.
That's definitely consistent for my patient population. We don't have a lot of concerns. The biggest complaint is with capsaicin. And of course, we use a lot of capsaicin in kids with topical anesthetic, but it's at a low concentration, which isn't as bothersome. But that's the number one complaint that we get. The other creams, very few people have any local reactions, no complaints of systemic side effects at all. Patients are very satisfied who are satisfied. I think the biggest concern with this entire area is that we haven't really defined the outcomes very well, even to compare literature across the board. It'd be really nice even if we had a registry. And, you know, with big data and the potential to register patients, I mean, which patients respond? What about predictors? What about race or, you know, people of color, where we could start defining better outcomes that are consistent so you can measure the different patient responses and really trying to individualize this area of science a little bit more precisely.
Joyce?
So, you know, I'd never underestimate your patient's ability to use their drugs inappropriately. So, you know, I mean, you try to get people to understand what you're asking them to do, what they're using. Luckily, you know, we prescribe 100 grams usually in a tub or whatever. That's not usually enough for the drugs that I use, given what I know about their systemic absorption or lack thereof, to cause trouble. But, you know, safety events are rare. You know, just because I have 20 years experience and haven't had a significant safety event doesn't mean I won't have one tomorrow. So, you know, again, because of a lot of the cognitive effects and other concerns, developmental effects of drugs in children, I do feel better using these drugs topically. But like I said, if I could get rid of drug use for chronic pain in kids, I'd have no problem with that. It's usually parents asking me, you know, but most of the drugs that are out there just are not particularly effective or safe, in my opinion.
I don't have much to add. That's been my anecdotal experience as well. I've not seen major issues with adverse effects from the topical agents.
I think the biggest challenge is that patients will try them just once and say, you know, it doesn't work, because these are patients who are refractory to a lot of different modalities. So the one patient you find that does really well, I mean, that's a celebration, because so many of them, you know, fail the therapy and it just doesn't work. And then you know, it's a one-time prescription. It would be really interesting to look at the data across all of the compounding pharmacies to see how many are one-time prescriptions versus more long-term.
Joyce?
Dr. Dimoth, do you see a trade-off between treating the chronic pain, and then, which then results in less pain, and then the person, because you're not treating the underlying injury, goes on to, because you were saying that many of the chronic pain is due to overuse, do they then go on to make themselves worse if you just treat pain only?
Well, I don't, in that situation, I don't just treat pain only, it's multimodal, all these other things are part of it, and you know, it certainly can be an issue with, if you're blocking pain, that they can make their issues worse, but typically, I don't generally think about that being that clinically relevant, except in the situations where it's playoff crunch time and you're injecting joints to get a player through a game. That's very small number of patients that we do that with. So I don't, because it's so multimodal, and we have whole, I didn't even go into this, we have whole sorts of sort of return to play guidelines to follow in terms of functional exercise and activities and making sure their balance and proprioception, all these things are improved as they get back into their activity. So for the most part, I don't really worry about that in terms of an issue. The one would be there are case reports and some, I guess there's some lawsuits involved with this, as well as players who were injected repeatedly and end up with the worst problem going forward. So you have to certainly be cognizant of that and discuss that with the player and the risk benefit in that situation. But for the general population, that's not something I'm too overly concerned about.
Carmen? Carmen? Go ahead.
So, you don't have to worry about money for the patients. If you did have to worry about money, meaning whether or not your patient could afford it, would you be prescribing these things? And how would your education differ? And maybe everybody else can participate in that question too.
No, so I think that's a very important question. And so I've done a lot of work in Dallas at the Children's Medical Center, which is a lot of no insurance, little insurance, and so I have to work around that. As I alluded to in my last slide, I don't use these prescription medications hardly at all anymore. I just don't think it's worth it in terms of the cost and the value that you get. So I don't prescribe them often. And so anyway, so my approach is the first thing I'd mentioned is education about doing your physical therapy, rehabilitation exercises, sleeping well, which is critical. No one talked about sleep, but the importance of sleep in life, in dealing with chronic pain, et cetera, and eating appropriately. I tell people, if there's only 3 things you can do in your life to make your life better: sleep well, eat well, and exercise on a regular basis, and obviously not smoke. But so that's a lot of the education I spend with patients.
So you aren't using these really, not at all?
No,
It's
no.
not a real role for you to provide education?
Well, no, but I
I'm
get.
talking about patient education in regards to topical pain creams.
But are you talking about the underprivileged in terms of, or just?
No, I asked the question, if money was no object, I mean, there are some people, your patients, in large part, you were talking about money's not an object for the NHL or whoever else you're providing care for. So you can open up the vault, right? If you didn't have that consideration, meaning is Janine's patient in Billings, Montana, would you be prescribing these things? And if so, what medications would you be prescribing? And I can ask that question of all 3 of you.
So the answer is no, I would not be prescribing these. I don't prescribe these now at this point in time. That's evolved over the course of time. Now, the one thing I forgot to mention during my presentation, I got to UT Southwestern in 2009, and it took us a while to get our sports medicine clinic up and running. It was a couple years later, and so we had a separate facility. It was the first time UT Southwestern ever done anything like that. So my surgical partner and I went up there to this facility and started sort of practicing real sports, I'll call it real sports medicine. But we got hit with a lot of vendors that wanted to provide us with braces and salves and creams and the compounding pharmacy stuff, and this is right when this just hit. So we had these people that are now being sued, apparently, these compounding pharmacy that came through with these prescription, these paper that somebody listed here that has the different drugs, and just, oh yeah, check this one off. Oh yeah, this patient has arthritis, so on and so forth. And it took us not too long, but it took us about 6 months or so to realize that what they were doing is they were charging the insurance companies $2,000 to $3,000 or more for these compounded anti-inflammatory creams for these chronic pain conditions. and they were refilling them on a regular basis without us necessarily being aware, and the patients are the ones who brought it up to this, said, look at this, they charged my insurance company $3,000 for this. And we said, holy, so that put an end to that. I mean, I just could not ethically justify, I don't care who's paying for it, but these exorbitant costs. And so that really soured me on this. And so I stopped using those about 5 or 6 years ago. And now I do have a compounding pharmacist I work with who works with, and she does a great job. And so we're talking about coming up with some of these things moving forward in a more reasonable manner. Now I know for the hormone replacement, I think that the topical stuff there makes a whole lot of sense. But from a pain standpoint, I'm not prescribing these very often.
But I'm a little, so I've got two questions. I'm a little confused because you said now you're going to talk to a compounding pharmacy to do some things in a reasonable manner. What is that about?
So in the last.
So is it about topical pain? We're really focusing on topical. We don't want to hear about hormones.
No, but she's in charge of the pharmacy that that I use with the Dallas Stars. Each team has to have a pharmacy that's available for all the players. But she's actually here at the meeting somewhere. But anyway, she is. But we've talked about potentially doing some of this moving forward. But I haven't done that yet with her. I stopped using these again about 5 or 6 years ago when I realized what was going on.
So, and my last question is, and I'll start with the pediatrician first, and then we'll end with the lady, so she gets the last word. So you're in the middle. What type of recommendations would you want this committee to make, to cover in this particular report as it relates to no hormones?
I got it.
Topical pain creams.
So more data is necessary, safety data is necessary, data in defined conditions against either standard treatment or placebo or whatever is necessary. Don't leave out kids. That study is really important as well. I think those, but I don't think we should throw out topicals as not efficacious and not recommended at the end of this group's meetings, because I don't think we're ready to do that yet.
So we clearly need, like all of medicine, we clearly need more evidence that these compounded creams make a difference in terms of patient outcome. The safety issue, I'm pretty convinced personally from a safety issue that unless, if they're prescribed really well, that safety is not such an issue. I need to see efficacy. I need to show that it has improvement in outcomes. And that's what we lack.
So I'll add to the more research, and I think, again, better outcomes that are well-defined. For example, in the Brecher study, their outcome was a 2-point reduction in pain. In the Cochrane reviews, it's a 50% reduction. So when you're looking at the literature, it's very difficult to compare the studies because of the variability in the outcomes. I also think we need more diverse patient populations. If you look at all the studies that are out there, very few of them are even publishing race. They're not there, and we talked about some of the individual variability that exists with people of color and different age groups, the younger and the older. And so we really need to look at individual response to some of these analgesic creams and do better predictive models. I think those are the main things, but also the reimbursement system. So reimbursement varies greatly. So out of our 3 compounding pharmacies and billings, we have one that always submits for reimbursement. The interesting thing is that we'll sometimes get Medicaid to pay, and we definitely try to advocate for patients, because when we do get to this point, again, these are refractory patients who have tried multiple things, so we're trying to advocate them to try something new that will provide them with relief. Medicaid, we have some success with. Medicare, 0. Private insurance, about 20%. So then you get some disparities in who can actually have these creams is who can pay for them, and it's the underinsured and the people who can afford it that we just, can't put on therapy.
Thank you for those comments. Those were very good comments. Deb, did you have one more question? Or John, a brief question? No question? No, thank you so much. It was very,
There's a
very-
question in the
Oh,
back.
a question in the back. Oh. Not a question, okay. Oh, no, we're only taking questions. No.
And this is just in reference to, I think, the text message that Dr. Dimef showed. When I saw that, I don't know that that was for a compound. I know the patient reported it as a compound, but it was identified as 3 separate billing items. I believe those are 3 separate FDA-approved products. The last one, the steroids, it's on patent. It's not even available as a compounding ingredient. The lidocaine-prilocaine combination is an FDA-approved product, and of course, so is the diclofenac. So I know the patient reported it as a compound, but I don't believe that that's necessarily accurate. So the cost associated with that, as well as the lack of efficacy, I don't think would be attributed to a failure on the compounding side.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay. Well, this concludes the open session of this meeting. And we'd like to thank again the FDA for their support of the study. And I'd also like to thank all of our incredible speakers, and I know there's just maybe 2/3 of them left, not all of them. I just want to really say thank you. You have brought information that has really helped us frame and understand this whole topic better. We appreciate that. So thanks also for those who are here to listen, but also those that are virtual. We got a couple comments from people that were virtual, but no questions. So we're not going to stop and ask those particular questions. But please, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your evening. That's it for the day.